Good day, everybody. This is Dan Fenn, and this is the latest edition of Lexington Remembers. But it's a special segment of Lexington Remembers because we're focusing on World War II, since this is the 75th anniversary of the end. The committee here in Lexington has had all kinds of great plans to mark that and celebrate it. Some of those have been deflected by by COVID-19, of course. But this series of interviews that we've been conducting goes on, and this one is really extraordinarily special because my conversation is with an old friend of mine named TedRowse, an old Lexington family, and he has quite a story to tell, and an extraordinary career in journalism. I first met Ted not around Lexington really, but around the Harvard Crimson. He and I were both on the Crimson. He was a couple of years ahead of me. But when I moved to Lexington in 1949, I was very well aware of the Rouse family. Ted's father, Arthur, was also Ted, as I recall, was a major figure in Lexington civic life. And when did your family first move to Lexington, Ted?
We moved to Lexington in 1925 when I was 5 years old.
Well, now let's see if my calculator is right. If you were 5 years old in 1925, you were born in 1920, and that must make you 100.
Yeah, I turned 100 in April 30.
No kidding.
Yes, and because of the pandemic, the neighbors got together in a big drive-by of cars, and
oh, wonderful!
Waving tennis rackets and things like that by the house.
Wow! And where are you living now, Ted?
I live in Chevy Chase, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C.
And I see all kinds of great stuff on the walls behind you. What is your living situation? Are you?
I live with my wife here now, and she's 97. She's going to turn 97 in next week. And
wow.
Yeah.
And what are you up to these days?
Well, I just wrote an op-ed piece for the New York Times a few days ago on my 100th birthday, and they ran it in the New York Times, and this was seen by quite a few people. A lot of old friends contacted me as a result of the article in the New York Times, and the Times asked me to since I was 100 years old, to think about what important things that happened in the past, and so I wrote about the FDR's ability to lead the country through both World War II and the Depression.
Yeah, right.
pretty much at the same time. And it was interesting because there was also some similarities between FDR and Trump in the way they could communicate with the average American. As you know, Trump uses Twitter, but FDR was just learned how to use the radio for the first time, and he had what they call chats. He had the evening chats on the radio, and so he was able to bring the country along, although there was an awful lot of opposition to us even getting into the war, and also a lot of opposition to his programs designed to bring us out of the Depression.
We're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but I remember, Franklin Roosevelt had 6 people in the White House to help him with both the war and the Depression. Trump's got about 1,500, so things have changed a lot.
Yes.
But let's go back. So you were 5 when you moved to Lexington, and where did you guys live?
We lived in Somerset Road.
And where was your father before then? Where was the family?
We lived in Winchester before we moved to
I see.
Lexington.
Yeah. Okay. And did you go through the Lexington schools?
Yes,
then?
I went to Hancock Elementary School.
Yeah.
And junior high school. And
At Muzzy?
no, not Muzzy. No, it was so on Massachusetts Avenue there.
Yeah.
Junior high school and high school were pretty much in the same building, I think.
And your father was, as I remember, he was in the apple juice business.
Yes, his father was in the vinegar business, and my father took over that business after my father came back from the World War I in the Navy, and so he took over the family business and got into more of the apple juice end of it.
Did they have a headquarters in Medford?
No, his headquarters was in Somerville.
And then when did they leave town, Ted?
When did they leave? Oh, it was in 1960.
Oh, okay.
1960, they moved to New Hampshire.
Okay.
Uh,
And what happened to the business?
he finally sold it.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So you went to the Lexington schools, and then you went to Harvard in the class of what?
1943.
43. So you were a year ahead of me. Yeah.
Right.
And so then you, the war came along, of course. And what did you do?
I enlisted in the Army and under a special program connected with business school, and where a business school would do some of the training for a quartermaster corps. And so instead of taking my junior year at college, I went to business school under the Army program.
And Bob McNamara was involved in that?
No, I don't remember his involvement
Okay.
in that, no.
Okay. And so that was a quartermaster course, which took how long then?
Well, we were shipped to Camp Lee, Virginia for basic training. And then
Oh, yeah.
after basic, because everybody had to take basic training, military training. And then after we finished, there were 60 of us from business school. And after we had finished our basic training, at that point, officers training school had closed down. And so I volunteered to go overseas and wound up in a military government job in Italy.
Really? Where?
In Naples. But
I love Naples.
I spent 2 years
So
in Naples.
when did you go to Naples?
Well, it was 1942 or 3 when I went overseas and started working for the military government.
How did you get into military government? I was always interested.
Well, because
Never could make it.
because after officers training school closed, there was nothing for any of us to do. So I volunteered, and I wound up in an army unit that was completely filled with Italian-speaking men, and they issued each one of us a can of shoe impregnate, which is designed to protect your shoes from mustard gas. And it was kind of weird because they didn't tell us where we were going, but they just gave us this compact Italian dictionary and a can of shoe impregnate, so that we knew we were not going to stay around the U.S. much longer. So we all went to Naples via Casablanca, North Africa, and Naples.
I got to Naples in late January of 1944.
Oh, really?
So you were already there.
Yes.
And then I went across the boot to a town called Cerignola to an Army Air Corps base.
Uh-huh.
So what that must have been pretty interesting, that military government stuff.
Let me tell you that on the way, on the way overseas, I went with a Liberty ship.
Oh yeah.
That had 500 GIs in one hold of the ship.
Yeah.
And it took us 20 days to get from Norfolk to Casablanca, which would an aircraft carrier can do in about 4.5 days.
Yeah.
And in Casablanca, I saw the movie Casablanca for the first time.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I got to Casablanca on my way home, but I remember those Liberty ships, and that was not that wasn't the Queen Mary.
No.
Yeah.
No, it took us three weeks, 20 days.
Yeah.
To go. A trip would take only 4 days by aircraft carrier.
And did you travel in a convoy?
Yes, for a while we were in a convoy, but not always.
How long were you in Casablanca?
Only a little short while.
Yeah.
And we went across North Africa in a 40 and 8. I don't know if you know what that is. That's a World War I rail car, which is...
I sure as heck do. I went across Italy in one of those things.
Yes, and we had 35 guys with all their gear in one car, and it took us 3 days to go over the Atlas Mountains from Casablanca to Algiers.
Was it, how was the weather?
it was very cold. It was in late fall.
Yeah, yeah. That all sounds familiar because when I did it over the Apennines, it was January, February. So then you settled in Naples, and and what actually were you doing there?
We went from Naples to various provinces of Italy as they fell to the Allied forces. Um, we the Allied Control Commission was designed to take over the Italian government in its provinces as the line moved up the peninsula. So that's how and so we never really did much of any administration, but we were waiting all this time for the line to move.
They got stuck at Monte Cassino for months,
Yes.
and they were in Monte Cassino when I got there.
Mm.
So how long were you serving in Italy then?
26 months.
What happened? The war?
Well, I that was essentially my overseas tour for the U.S. Army, and after the war was over, about a couple of weeks after the European operations ended, I was notified by my parents that my brother was killed in Germany 3 weeks earlier.
Boy, that must have been pretty horrible. Where was he in Germany then?
He was a forward scout for the Patton's army that was racing to get to Berlin against the Russians, and so they went across the Elbe River, ELBE, and right into a machine gun nest. And so they were pretty much wiped out.
When was he killed, Ted?
April 15th, 1945.
Oh, that late. And that
the war ended in Europe. The war ended 3 weeks later.
Right. Right. And that must have been an incredibly shattering experience for the whole family.
It certainly was, yes. Just devastating because he was the youngest of the 3 children, and that's the mother's baby. So he was closest to my mother.
How did she deal with this? How did your whole family deal with it?
Well, one thing they did was they decided to set up a scholarship at Phillips Exeter Academy, where my brother had gone to school, and they put some money into a scholarship fund. That was back very early, very soon after they got word about this. And this has been a wonderful thing for everybody concerned. It helped the family get over the tragedy and it helped the school, of course, and it helped the young boys specifically in the inner cities. We were looking for students from inner cities where the schools were not particularly good, and so they could really make a difference. And this has been a tremendous thing in my life, my sister's life, and of course my parents were well, gone by now, but my sister's still living. But just a few weeks ago, one of the recipients, a fellow named Yan, a Chinese, he was from China. He contacted all the people who had received Rouse Scholarship Awards over the years and asked them to make a statement or say something about what they've done, how much that might have made a difference to them in their life. And it was just overwhelming to read these things and to know that this gesture that resulted from my brother's death turned into such a positive experience for so many people in the world.
Well, that's a moving story. So when did you get to go home, Ted?
Oh, a few months later.
Yeah. And did you get discharged when you got home?
Yes, I got discharged and then I finished my education and got a master's degree at business school. And but I asked the college if I could get a bachelor's degree for having been there for 3 years, and they said no.
Yeah. So your time at the business school and the quartermaster corps didn't count?
No, of course I never was in the quartermaster corps, but
okay. All right. Now, when did you start with journalism? I started in the 5th grade, but when did you start?
Well, I started when I was 10 years old. I guess I was in the 5th grade too. In Lexington, I was 10 years old, and I started a weekly neighborhood newspaper called Neighborhood News in our area of the town. And I ran it for 4 years.
So that it covered your part of town there on Somerset Road?
Yes, that's right. And it was mostly based on conversations in the living room or dining room of the house.
Gee, that's enterprising. And what about the school paper in high school or junior high?
Well, I worked on that, but I also worked in a paper at Exeter, and I was, as I said earlier, I was elected sports editor of the Harvard Crimson.
When you came back to Lexington in what, 45?
Yes.
Yeah. And so then you went back to school, and then what did you do?
Well, I tried out my dad's business for 1 year, but we didn't get along very well. And so I volunteered to be a reporter on the New Hampshire Sunday News. It was a new paper that was started in Manchester, New Hampshire, because the biggest daily in New Hampshire did not have a Sunday paper.
Really?
There was no Sunday paper in the whole state. Blair Clark, you remember Blair Clark?
Yeah, oh, sure.
And Ben Bradley. And Ben Bradley was a fellow reporter with me on the staff of the paper.
No kidding.
Yes.
Yeah, he was the class of 1940, I think, Ted. Same as
1943.
JFK's class.
Ben was a class of 43, but my class.
I had an idea it was Kennedy's class.
So it's interesting that I later worked on some Boston papers and then got a job with the Washington Post and worked down the Washington Post before he got there.
So Loeb didn't have a Sunday paper, huh?
No, there's no Sunday paper in the state.
So how did that go? How did it survive?
Well, the paper was sold a few months after I got the job there. We started getting into a lot of things that were very embarrassing to the powers that be in New Hampshire. And so they bought out the paper. And so I wound up having to get another job.
And family's still in Lexington.
No, as you say, my family moved to New Hampshire, in Peterborough, New Hampshire, in 1960.
1960.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there were other Rouses in Lexington. There was
Oh, really?
Richard Rouse, who was a cousin of my father, and Walter Rouse. He was an uncle of my father's. And,
Really?
yes.
Okay.
Walter Rouse lived on Winthrop Road, and Richard Rouse lived right off the Common at Harrington.
Okay.
He lived in the Harrington house off the Common.
Oh, really?
You know the Harrington house where
Oh, sure.
yeah, where
Right on the corner.
yeah, the owner
Man,
was
I
shot.
didn't know that.
He was shot by the British and crawled over to his wife's feet at the front of his house and died.
Yeah, I remember that story. And when we do reenactments, we do it every year.
Mm-hmm.
So from New Hampshire and that paper, you went where?
I worked in. Actually, I borrowed some money from my father and started a paper in Maynard, Massachusetts. No, I bought a paper in Maynard, Massachusetts, and worked there for about 3 years. And while I was there, I also worked at night on some Boston daily papers, including the Boston Post, the Boston Globe, and the Boston Herald Traveler.
And I worked on the Post too, as the Harvard stringer. In the covered Harvard for the old Post. So you were around in the Boston papers, and what kind of stories were you doing?
Well, I was a copy editor. You know what a copy editor? I was on the copy desk.
Okay.
I edited the news stories and wrote headlines.
Okay. And from Boston?
From Boston, I came down to the Washington Post.
Really? Okay. And what was your assignment in the Post?
I was an assistant city editor.
Okay.
Post for 5 years.
And when did you do your first book?
First book was in 1957. It was called Sign of News. It was a case study of newspaper bias in the 1952 election. There was a lot of furor about that election, and that was when Nixon gave his famous speech. And the newspapers around the country were very strongly Republican, and you could see that in the news, the way they handled the news. And it
In
bothered me.
1962 or 1960?
1952,
Yeah.
And this bothered me. So I took pictures of their front pages,
Oh, yeah.
and each one of the papers, and showed how I felt that they had slanted the news in favor of the Republicans.
Yeah. And it attracted quite a bit of notice, as I recall.
It did, yes, but it was a small book, and people could get pretty much everything out of it by just reading the review. So it didn't sell very well, and it didn't sell because also the publisher was Beacon Publishing Company in Boston, a very small company, and they didn't have enough books in the bookstores to handle the business when it really hit the news.
And then you were at the Post for 5 years.
Yes.
And then what?
And then I went over to the White House Consumer Office.
Ah, okay.
Was Esther Peterson? Did you ever hear of Esther Peterson?
Yeah.
She was.
Yeah, I certainly do. Consumer Council.
Yes.
You know, that must have been where we reconnected, because I certainly remember seeing you from time to time when I was in Washington.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you came here quite a few years before I did. You came here.
I came in 1961.
Yeah.
For 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
And well, that must have been fun. So you were the public affairs officer for Esther Peterson?
No, I was the executive director.
Ah, okay.
Of her White House office, and she was Assistant Secretary of Labor, as well as Assistant to the President for Consumer Affairs.
Yeah, yeah. That was very, very dramatic stuff when she was doing that. She was a great lady. Then you had another book.
Well, there's another book. I wrote a book on Reagan. After a couple of years of Reagan, I figured he was tearing down all the consumer legislation and rules that had been placed in there by Ralph Nader and all of that crew. And so I wrote a book, One Sweet Guy and What He's Doing to You. I published it myself, so it didn't sell very much. A few years ago, I wrote a book on Amglish.
My goodness, when did you write that one?
About eight years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now, do you consider yourself retired, or are you still writing?
Well, I've been retired for quite a long time. And the article in the Times a few weeks ago was a rare occasion.
And are you writing a bit now?
No, I'm not writing anything.
Yeah.
No.
Well, it's not surprising. Well, that's a pretty fascinating, productive, dramatic career you've had. And, you know, I would see your name in the papers from time to time. And it's really a blessing after all these years to be not exactly face to face, but face to face via these marvelous machines. Is there anything that you would like to add about your start as a journalist in Lexington, or any observations about where we are right now?
Well, we certainly are in a bind now. We're in a very, very terrible situation in the country, and it certainly is. People need help, I think, a lot, and how to get along in such an environment. It's very hard to do, and I think that that when you face adversity and disappointments and sadness, that you can learn a lot from it, and to help you get through other examples of disappointments and other types of sadness. And I keep going back to my brother. He was a very dedicated guy, and he very idealistic. And at one point, I published a little brochure. This is the brochure in his memory, and the whole idea that my family tried to push from this whole thing was renewal, and renew your own life when you get such sadness in your own life, and try to be thinking positively. My brother was so idealistic that he drew up all kinds of little things like, how do you for instance, he had things like, make your mind up quickly, build up the other person, admit defeat when you know you're beaten, never start to talk when another person is speaking, do not use childish humor or remarks which make you look like you're a numbskull. Always be enthusiastic, be really interested in other people, and be a good listener. Do not be afraid to show and tell another person you like them. Do not criticize or talk against another person. Be generous to other people with money and time. Things like that. He was so idealistic, and I suppose he got what's coming through people like that too. An early death.
That's lovely. I'm awfully glad you read that to us. And I think that's a beautiful point to end on. So I thank you very much, and I'm proud to have known you. I wish we'd had more connection over these years, but at least we had a connection.
Well, I certainly would like to have done that too. It was nice to know you from your beginnings, sir.
Yeah.
I enjoyed talking with you very much.
Good. Many thanks, Ted. Best wishes.
You're welcome.